Okay, so this is going to be our lecture for React Router. I don't have slides that I'm going to be looking at here. We know what the issues are here. We know that right now we've got a single page application where the URL bar stays exactly the same every time. This is a big issue. In fact, it sort of reminds me of when people used to write applications in a program called Flash, if you ever remember it. And it was really, it was a product by Macromedia. Yeah, there was no navigation in there. It was basically just a movie that was playing backwards and forwards. And people would go nuts in your application if you didn't have state changing. So, excuse me, if you couldn't basically, let's be honest about it, it's really bookmark parts of your application. It's important. So let's think about how we're going to do that. Now, one thing that I think is just important to say off the bat, there's going to be a little bit of a lift here with React Router. What I mean is that it might take you a little bit of work to get comfortable with it. React Router might get a little bit easier to use when we start looking at some other parts of the React ecosystem. But on its own, again, there's going to be a little bit of work here to do it. Now, again, I'm not going to start out with an app from scratch. Instead, I'm going to go over here. And again, we've sort of looked at this before. We can always add to it. But this is my React template. Let me make this a little bit smaller. And so I'm going to go over here, and I'm just going to clone this. And let me open up a terminal window, and we'll get started. So what I'm going to do here, git.clone, and I'm going to say this is going to be React Router demo. Let me do rm.ref, React Router demo. Git.clone, React Router demo. Okay, cd React Router demo. Okay, so I'm going to do an npm install. So this is installing all the dependencies that we need here. Again, I don't have my node modules in my Git folder. Excuse me, into my GitHub repo. And again, if you go to use this and you go to clone this, you can clone this and just delete the Git repo and create a new Git repo, which is what I'm going to end up doing here. Just see what I'm. All right, why it's so slow. Let's open this up a little bit. Let me actually open this up in Vim. And let's take a look at it. Again, nothing you haven't seen before, right? If we end up just starting out, however you want to start out. Again, if I was creating this from scratch, let me do the model first. Model, here's Sequelize. I've got my database URL. I've got my product. I've got my sink, and in this case, I'm creating 3 products with the name of Foo, Bar, and Baz. I'm basically exposing my sink and my seed. If I go and I look at the server, I've got a couple of static routes. I've got my index page. I've got my API for my routes. And this is, again, not a lot of code that we're looking at. If we end up looking at our routes themselves, pretty bare bones. Here's our router. Again, these are things which hopefully you've done maybe a dozen times already and you're very comfortable with. So once I end up doing that, assuming this is finally installed, I could say npm run start dev. And for me, if I go over here to my Chrome and I say localhost 3000, I'm going to say just a bar with the number 42. Okay? So let me actually first go over here and say rm.rf, my Git repo. Now I can initialize it again. And what we could do is start taking a look at what's happening. Again, the other piece that we have here is our web config. And again, hopefully you've at least done this once or twice, type this out. Again, it's good practice just to show you what some of the moving parts are. I've only got this app. I'm passing in some props, which are my special number, and I'm just printing out my special number. All in all, not terribly exciting here. We know that we have products here. So let's go over here and let's just sort of get the ball rolling by going in here and putting import Axios from Axios. And I think from a prior package JSON, I think Axios is actually there already, so I don't need to do anything. And I'm going to go over here and just say this.state, and I'll specify users is an empty array. And just for the sake of argument, I'll get rid of that special number here, and I'll go in and I'll say this.state.users.length. And if I was to go and do that, I'm going to see not the number 42, but the number 0. Okay? Again, because I have some initial state set up here. But if I were to go over here and say component did mount, and then I was to go over here and specify axios.get/API. I don't know why I keep on doing users. I don't know why. Products. I get a response. I'm only interested in the data, response.data. These are going to give me products. And what I want to do is say this set state products. And this is not users. This is going to be products. So we'll go over here. We'll say products.length, and I should see, thank you, I should see the number 3 because I have 3 products. Well, let's set our application up so that we have actually a couple of different tabs in our application. So we're going to go over here, and what we'll do is I'm just going to make this instead a container. And I'm going to say ul class name equals nav tabs. And I'll put an li, another li, and I'll go over here and I'll put href equals / home to see what that gives us. Okay. Now we've got this nav bar that's on the top of our page. Not all that interesting. Now let's say that what we wanted to do is we actually wanted to have 2 tabs in our application. We wanted to have one for home, and we wanted to have one for products, right? We've got products in our application. Maybe the home page says something about us. And we're going to do something like products. Maybe when we put the number of products that we have over here, that's something we can always do, right? We've got our this.state.products.length, and we're making this call anyway. So now we've got our 3 products. Again, these links aren't going to do very much for us. Well, what we want to do here, now we could do it the way we did it before, right? We could start out and say, hey, look, we're going to default to one of these pages and decide to show 2 different pages. What might these pages look like? Well, let's keep it as simplistic as we could possibly keep it. Make a couple of really, really dumb components. Eventually we'll pull them out and put them into their own files. Let's say const home. And we're going to make these real dumb. And this is going to return a div, class name, well, home. And we'll go over here. And this is going to be products. And just for starting, we'll say products. So, I mean, for the sake of argument, nothing would prevent me from going in here and saying home, products. Doesn't make a lot of sense. I really want them to show up when I end up clicking on one of these. Well, this is really where routing ends up coming in. Now, one thing that I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to get React Router. React Router is a separate project. In fact, React Router changed recently, and this screwed me up a couple of times, and it's explicit in your workshop, that they came out with a 4.0 router, but the 3.0 router, I think, is the one that's really being used at this point. So you haven't had to do this before. But we could say npm install react router @ says the version number, 3.0.0. Save. It's going to be in the workshop as well. But there's some big changes from the React 3 router and the React 4 router. I don't know that much about the React 4 router. I know we're not really using it in the workshop. Comes time to learn about it, I will, but there's actually, I think at this point, being really supported independently, from what I understand. Once I do that, I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to say import, okay? There's 3 things that I need right off the bat. I need a router. I need to be able to create routes from the router. I need a way to go back and forth in my router, okay? Because what's going to happen is that React is going to keep track of the history when I go to different pages, okay? And it's not going to want to use the traditional browser back button and forward button, okay? It's going to want to go back to what the prior route was or what the prior state was so that a user's experience is the experience that they expect. A classic case here, just to sort of see this. One could make the case, and this is going to be from React Router. One could easily make the case that in our app over here, if someone was on products and they go to users and they click the back button, this is not really where they expect to go. Okay? So this is going to be solved by using a router, which is basically going to say, I'm going to control your history. Okay? I'm going to take over the forward and back control of the browser. And there's basically APIs within the browser that allow this to happen. And this is what we're going to take advantage of. So what we need to do is we need to create some routes. And what we're going to do here is we're going to specify that we have some routes. And I'm just putting the parentheses here for no other reason that I want to put this on multiple lines. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a router. A router needs to have a history. Okay? If you don't give it a history, it's not going to know what to do. Our history is going to be the hash history. And we're going to give our router a route. The route that we're going to give it is the default route, which is /. Okay? What React Router needs to know is, hey, look, when someone goes here to this URL, what component do you want me to create? And the component that we want them to create is, in fact, our app component. Okay, now, again, nothing should break here. If we went back here, if something does break, we have another issue. Once we go back here, nothing is going to change. But if we want to use our routes, we better go over here and say, when you render our application, render our routes. Okay? Here are the routes for our application. When you determine what components to create, it's going to be based on what the URL is. So now if we go back here, we're at the exact same spot that we were before. In fact, let's actually take a couple of things out of here. Yeah, so Mitch is saying, yes, we now have this pound sign here, and that's actually happening with the hash history. In fact, if I went back here and got rid of that pound and hit enter again, that pound is going to keep on coming back. There's a reason for that. If I want to do a hard reload of this page, if I did anything else, well, this slash route would work, but we'll find out some of the other routes we create would be a little problematic. So we're going to start out that hash is coming from this hash history object. When we end up moving to a different type of history, which is browser history, we'll see that hash go away. So what we're going to do here is we're going to get rid of our home and we're going to get rid of our products. Now, I think everyone can say that it probably makes sense that on our application, we want this nav bar to show up all the time, right? Kind of makes sense that we want that nav bar to show up so that you can navigate between different pages. But we also would like our home page to show up. Now, one of the things that I can do is I can go and I can put a closing tag here, and I can say, hey, basically, this route is going to have some children. There are going to be sub-routes for this route, okay? Meaning you could have a slash and something after the slash, like products, okay? So maybe what I want to do is, by default, I want to have my home page show up. So what I can do here is that there's another thing that I could bring in here called index route. And this says, hey, look, if you have a nested route, within this route, we could say, hey, look, if you didn't put anything after this slash, tell me what component you want here. Okay? We have the app component. That's fine. Okay? But what do you want here? Well, we want by default, if someone goes to the slash, to load our home component. In which case, if I went back here, absolutely nothing would change. We might be looking for our home component, and we ain't going to find it. Okay? In fact, if I go back over here and I add another route, and I say route, my path here, okay, is going to be products. It's going to be products under slash. My component is going to be products. Okay? Once I do that, I can reload this, and if I go here and I say products, nada, nothing. I go here and I say slash, nothing. Okay? I don't see my home and I don't see my products. What's happening here is that these components are coming in as children. Okay? Meaning that even though I don't see it here, my router is now controlling when this app ends up getting rendered. And since my router is controlling this, if I go back here, okay, remember I'm in a smart component. This has props, okay, and props have children. We haven't really looked at children before. We haven't had the need to look at them. But they exist, and React Router is sending those children along for the ride. We've got our app route, okay? If we don't specify anything else, home is going to be the component that's going to be the child. If we specify products, products is going to be the component that's going to come along for the ride. Once I do this, I've got home here, and if I go to products, I've got products. Now, if I click on this link, right, this does a full back-end request, okay? React is not getting involved here. What I can do is instead of actually putting these links in as hard-coded links, I could go up here and specify something else I want to bring in here called link. And I'm going to go over here and say link to / home. Link to / products link. Now if I do that, and I go back here, I click on home, I'm on home, I click on products, I'm on products. Okay? So this is what's allowing me to create this navigation. Now, would also be nice if I was able to go in here, and when I was on home, this looked like it was selected. And when I was on products, this looked like this was selected. One of the things that comes along whenever this ends up rendering, and now keep in mind that our rendering is being controlled by our React router. Our router is looking for changes in the URL, okay? And it's going to basically determine, okay, when this ends up getting rendered. But let me just do something here. When I go in here to render, one of the things that's going to come along for the ride, console.log, this props.router. Okay, it's there because we're using a router. If I open up my DevTools here, I'll see that one of the things that I have when I get that router is I get a location. If I look inside the location, I'll end up getting the path name. So if I was to go in here and say this props router dot location path name, and I do that, I'll see I've got products and home, products and home. Okay? You'll notice that's rendering multiple times. It's not your problem, right? Don't worry about it. If I go back over here, one of the things I can do is put in a little function here, active. Pass me a path name, okay? And I'm going to tell you whether this props.router.pathName is equal to the path name that you pass me. And now what this allows me to do is to go in here and say class name, and go in here and specify if you're active, if the current path is /, then I want you to use the class name active, otherwise use nothing. On the same token, if the active path is products, I want to make that active. So you sneak in. And if I go over here, let's just see. This .props.router.pathname equals pathname. Let's just see why that's not showing up. Let's see. Let's also just see if I have an error with my. That looks good. So let's take a quick peek here. This props.router location.pathname. Sorry. And now home is pre-selected. Products is pre-selected. By the way, I could use a style sheet, but just for the sake of argument, just to do this pretty quickly, I'm going to go over here and just do an inline style. If you want to do an inline style, you're going here, and I'm basically have to do this as a JavaScript object, and I'll say margin bottom 10 pixels. Lazy man's way, instead of doing a style sheet. This way I'll have a little bit of border here. Now I've got my home, and I've got my products. Okay? The question is, how do I end up going over here? And what if I really wanted to pass down to products? Products would seem pretty reasonable, right? Maybe I want to go over here and say products.length. If I went to do that, reload this, and go to products, I'm going to get an error message, and it's going to say, I don't know what you're talking about. Okay? Now, what's interesting here is that we actually, if we go to render, I could do a console.log this.state.products, and I'll just do .length, just so you can see it. So I know the products are there. Right? I can see there's 0 over here. Let me go back to my, you see my back button is working. Here's my home. I go to products. I can see I've got 3 products. The question is, how do I pass them down here? Well, eventually we're going to find an easier way to pass them down. But the way that we're going to actually pass them down now is we're going to be a little bit defensive. And what we're going to do is I'm going to create an object here. And I'm going to create this object by saying object.assign. Object.assign allows me to create a new object. Okay? The way that object.assign works is says, hey, give me a target. There's your target. It's empty. What do you want to put on it? And I'm going to take everything that I put on the state, and I'm going to pass it down here. Just for the sake of argument, console.log object. Let me get rid of this length so this goes away. And I'll go over here. And you can see that I've got an object with products on it. Again, my whole goal is to make this available to the children. So I'm going to be defensive. I'm going to first of all say, hey, look, if in fact you have children, I don't see any reason why you wouldn't. But if you have children, I'm going to basically take the children, and I'm going to create new React elements from those children, and I'm going to give them properties from this object. And the way that I'm going to do it is React has a method called clone element. And I'm going to take this .props.children, and I want to clone them, but also, guys, all the children, this object that I have up here, I want you to have it. Okay? Meaning that what's going to happen here is that when I create these elements, this second object will get passed down. Anything in here will get passed down as properties to these objects. So what it allows me to do, let me get rid of this console.log. What it allows me to do is that if I come down here now, again, I shouldn't see any change. But now if I come down here, I could go over here and say products.length. 3 products. That allows me to go over here and do something like products.map, and we'll go over here and we'll say product, and let's create a list item, give it a key of product.id, and we'll specify here we've got a name, and this is going to be not a name. What am I doing here? We're going to say this is going to be product.name. And we'll map that out we'll have some list items. Let me give this an unordered list. In which case, we should see our 3 products. And if we wanted to, just to sort of, for the sake of argument, let's see if we have it in our routes here. But one of the things we could do is go over here and specify something like on delete product. We'll pass in a product. See if this is starting to make sense. Start out by doing console.log product. And we'll go over here and we'll say this on delete product equals this on delete product dot bind this. We're going to need to do that because we're going to want to modify the state over here. And we'll go here. And again, if we want to pass this down, one of the things we can do with object.assign is also go over here and say, hey, look, pass in another object on delete product and say this is from this on delete product. And now if I do that, all this is going to do is, again, just to show you, console.log object. This is just an object that when this console logs out should have my products and also my on delete product method. Okay? All that object assign allows me to do is go and give it objects that I can basically go and add to. Again, my whole reason for this is something interesting is going to happen in here, and we'll keep this relatively simple. I'm going to go over here and modify this and pass in on delete product, which is, again, now going to get passed in as a prop, the same way products did, on click. And what I'll do on this on click, I'm going to call a function on delete product, and I'm going to pass in my product. When I do this, and I click on this, I'm going to see my product. And just for the sake of argument, if I didn't want to do a back-end route here, if I go back over here and I say const products equals this dot state dot products, we're going to filter you. We're going to loop over each product. And if your ID is not equal to the product's ID that I'm passing to, I still want you. Again, it's not going to do anything until we and now if I do that, and let's see, on delete product, so let's see, I'm probably missing a, thank you. So now, foo, baz, bar, of course, if I reload the page, they all come back. But notice I've got nice behavior here. My back button works as expected. I could go over here and take this link and send it to Evan. You could see all these beautiful products that we have here. So Mitch has a question of why this end sign. And really, it's just defensive. So if, in fact, there are no children, now I don't expect this to be the case because, in fact, I've got a index route that basically should have a component in there. But this is just a little bit defensive. I could probably take it out. And this should work the same way. We could test it. But I think the reason why it's working is that I always have children. And the reason I always have children is, in fact, because I have this index route. If I didn't, that would end up throwing an error. So I guess we could sort of leave that out. But if it was null and you say React clone element and there's no children, you get a null value, and it ends up blowing up. So let's just do one more thing here, just for the sake of argument. One thing I'm not going to go into now is nested routes, but I am going to do something here. I'm going to get rid of this. I'm going to change this on click so that we'll put this on a button. And I'm going to go over here and I'll give this a class name, and this is going to be BTN warning. So if I go to products, again, it doesn't look all that pretty. Okay? And what I want to do here is, instead of clicking on this, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go over here and I'm going to modify this a little bit, so that within this link tag, what I'm going to do is I'm going to specify this is going to be a link to. And what this is going to be a link to, and this is going to be dynamic now. What this is going to be a link to is this is going to be a link to, and I'm going to go over here and I'll say this is going to go to /products product ID. And let's just see what this ends up doing here. List item should still be there, right? This is going to be a link within the list item. Let's just take a look. Maybe not.
So you have a /list.link li, but you don't have it in the left side? The left side didn't have the li.
I think I have it here.
Oh, sorry. Let
me do something. Yeah, this starts to get a little bit messy. Let's do a parenthesis here. This is going to start getting a little messy. Link to link. Let's just see. So actually, that just took a second. If I click on this, I'm going to get an error message that says, hey, look, this doesn't match any route. It's trying to get there, but it has no way of getting there. What I'm going to do is put a separate route down here. And this is going to be a route, and I'll go over here, and this is going to be path product /. So one of the things that I could do here is I can make this dynamic. And I'm going to have this go to product detail. Doesn't exist yet. We'll make this kind of dumb. Again, these could be separated out into separate files pretty easy. We'll say this is going to be product detail. And we'll go over here and I'll say div class name. I'll start out with my well. So now if I do that and I reload this, it should show me the product detail. Okay? It would be nice, by the way, on the product detail if I had a link back. I could go over here and say link to products. Not going to win any design contests here, but this will take me back to all the products, and I could go over here and go to an individual product. Now, what I could do here is that I'm going to have to just do a little bit of work here. So one of the things that you get is that if I go over here, and now since I did this, I need to put a return in here. So I'm going to go over here, and if I just go and catch my props, one of the things that I have, because I'm using React Router, if I say console log props.router, it's going to be available here. This is my router. Okay? One of the things in my router is I've got a params collection. Notice that that's got an ID of 1. If I go to bar and I look at this, this is going to be a params value of an ID of 2. So what I could do here is I could say console.log props router params ID. If I do that, there's 2, 1, 2, 3. Okay? Yeah.
And this is all routing, front end routing. This is tying the titles together with back end routing, or is
There's no tie. There's no tie.
this is just all front end?
React is all front end, right? I shouldn't necessarily say that. I shouldn't necessarily say that there's some stuff you could do on the back end with React, but in the end, what's going to get output is going to be front end code. So, I mean, yeah, there is some tie-in, but the tie-in is when we use Axios.
Right, that's what I was going to say.
That's a tie-in, right? So I'm going to go over here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to say const filtered, okay? And filtered is going to say, hey, look, take props dot products, filter them, look at the product, find the product whose ID is equal to props dot router params ID. Okay? And I'm going to say console.log filtered. When I do that, I'll see first it's empty, and then I have an object, and that's because this is happening asynchronously. So what I could do here is I could say if not filtered.length, meaning you haven't gotten your Ajax back yet, your products has not been populated, get out of here, but return null. Nothing to render here, folks. Okay? If I make it down here, I could say product equals filtered 0. Okay? And if I do that, then I could go over here and do something like product.name, product.id, and really not that much else to really show for that. But if I end up doing that, now I've got my product, and I'm able to work backwards. Again, this is a little bit of a, it's a word that I'm looking for, a little bit of a naive way to do it. Again, this is also operating under the assumptions that when we get all our products, that everything we need is going to be in there, okay? If we were going to make a separate API call for the details of a product, we'd have to do something a little bit more complicated. And we'll talk about that at some other point. But this should be enough to get you through the workshop with React Router. Again, I mentioned it was a little bit of a stretch here. These things should be pulled out to other components. The real things that I think get a little bit complicated here are the fact that when you want to pass these things down to your children, you're going to end up doing React clone element. I think that out of everything in the workshop, that's probably the most complicated thing that we'll be looking at. Let me stop this recording.